The morning sun filtered through the Venetian blinds of courtroom 305, casting stripes of light across Judge Robert Matthews' polished desk. At 62, he had spent more than 2 decades on the bench, and his morning routine had become as predictable as the sunrise. His silver-rimmed glasses perched on his nose as he methodically reviewed the day's cases, his coffee cooling beside a stack of manila folders. "Next case," he called out, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came from years of practice. He didn't bother looking up immediately, knowing his clerk would efficiently announce the details. Case number 2374, parking violation on Madison Avenue. The clerk announced, shuffling papers with practiced efficiency. Sarah Bennett walked forward, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. At 53, she carried herself with quiet dignity, wearing a navy business suit that spoke of understated elegance rather than flash. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she held a small folder of documents in her perfectly manicured hands. Judge Matthews glanced up briefly, his eyes scanning her appearance before returning to his papers. "Ms. Bennett, you're charged with parking in a restricted zone during peak hours. How do you plead?" "Your Honor, while I acknowledge my car was in that space, I believe there were extenuating circumstances that merit consideration," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the measured tones of someone accustomed to boardroom presentations. The judge's pen paused mid-signature. Something in her articulation made him look up again, but his expression remained impassive. "Proceed," he said, though his tone suggested he'd heard every excuse in the book. "The parking meter at space 247 was malfunctioning that morning," Sarah explained, opening her folder. "I have photographs showing the error message on the display, as well as time-stamped receipts from 3 separate attempts to pay using both the meter and the parking app." She stepped forward, offering the documentation. The court officer moved to collect the evidence, but Judge Matthews waved it away with a slight flick of his wrist. "Ms. Bennett, a malfunctioning meter doesn't exempt you from following posted parking restrictions. These zones are cleared for morning traffic flow, not meter revenue," he stated, his tone carrying years of similar dismissals. Sarah straightened her shoulders imperceptibly. "I understand that, Your Honor. However, I remained with my vehicle for 20 minutes attempting to resolve the issue through the parking authority's helpline. I have the call logs. The sign clearly states, 'No parking 7 a.m. to 9:30 a.m.' Judge Matthews interrupted, his patience wearing thin. "The functionality of the meter is irrelevant to the posted restrictions." The morning light shifted, highlighting the subtle tension in Sarah's jaw as she maintained her composure. "Your Honor, if I may." "That won't be necessary," he cut in, already reaching for his gavel. "The court finds you in violation of City Ordinance 22.5b. Given the peak hour restriction, you're fined the maximum penalty of $275. Next case." Sarah blinked once, the only visible sign of her reaction. She gathered her unopened folder of evidence with deliberate care, nodded respectfully to the court, and turned to leave. As she walked toward the exit, her posture remained perfectly straight, her head held high. Judge Matthews had already moved on to the next case file, missing the thoughtful look the court clerk gave Sarah's retreating figure. He also missed the way his officer studied the designer label on her briefcase, and the curious glance from the court reporter who had noticed the elegant Mont Blanc pen peeking from Sarah's folder. The morning sun continued its journey across the courtroom floor, unaware that it had just witnessed a moment that would soon ripple through the halls of justice in unexpected ways. 4 hours after her courtroom appearance, Sarah Bennett stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sterling Tower's 40th floor. The city sprawled beneath her, a maze of streets and buildings bathed in afternoon sunlight. She checked her watch, a subtle Cartier timepiece that had been a gift from the mayor's office for her philanthropic work, and turned back to the expansive boardroom. "The quarterly reports are ready, Ms. Bennett," her assistant Michael whispered, placing a leather portfolio in front of her seat at the head of the gleaming mahogany table. "And Governor Mitchell called to confirm his attendance at next month's fundraiser." Sarah nodded, her earlier courtroom encounter still lingering in her mind. "Thank you, Michael. Are all board members present?" "Yes, Mom," including 3 joining virtually from the East Coast. The boardroom filled quickly with the city's most influential figures. Bank presidents, retired judges, and corporate leaders took their seats, many greeting Sarah with warm familiarity. On the wall-mounted screens, 3 more faces appeared, including a Supreme Court justice who had cleared her schedule specifically for this meeting. Sarah took her place at the head of the table, her presence commanding immediate attention. "Good afternoon, everyone. Before we discuss the Foundation's next major initiative, I'd like to share some observations from my morning." The room quieted. When Sarah Bennett spoke, people listened, not because she demanded attention, but because her insights had transformed the city's judicial landscape over the past decade. "I experienced something interesting in traffic court today," she continued, her voice carrying the same measured tone she'd used hours earlier. "It reinforced what we've been discussing about the need for systemic change." A former state attorney leaned forward. "You were in traffic court." "Sometimes the best research is firsthand," Sarah replied with a slight smile. "But that's not why I'm bringing it up. What struck me was how the current system perpetuates certain behaviors, even with all our recent improvements." She opened her presentation with a graph showing disposition rates across different demographics. "Our foundation has invested $150 million in judicial reform over the past 5 years. We've upgraded courtroom technology, funded training programs, and established community outreach initiatives. Yet this morning, I witnessed how easily all that progress can be undermined by ingrained patterns." The board members exchanged glances as Sarah advanced to the next slide, revealing a bold proposal. "I'm recommending we double our investment in judicial education and community engagement. The preliminary budget is in your packets, $50 million for the first phase alone." Her finger traced along a row of figures. "This includes a revolutionary mentorship program pairing senior judges with community leaders, mandatory implicit bias training, and a complete overhaul of the minor court system." A soft murmur of approval rippled through the room. Sarah had earned their trust with her previous successes and her personal fortune, which she regularly used to fund pilot programs, gave weight to her proposals. "Questions?" she asked, knowing there would be few. Her reputation for thorough planning preceded her. As the discussion progressed, Sarah's phone buzzed quietly. A message from the courthouse administrator appeared. "Ms. Bennett, regarding this morning's case." She silenced the phone without reading further. That situation would resolve itself in due time. Right now, she had more important matters to address, like ensuring no one else would face the same treatment she had experienced just hours ago. The afternoon sun caught the edge of her water glass, sending prisms dancing across her notes. In their light, she could almost see the future she was building, one courtroom at a time. Jessica Chen loved puzzles, which made her perfect for her job as the court's administrative assistant. Organizing the daily chaos of paperwork into neat, logical patterns gave her satisfaction. But today, a particular pattern caught her attention in a way that made her sit up straighter in her ergonomic chair. She double-checked the name on the morning's traffic court docket. Sarah Bennett. Then she looked again at the signature on the Foundation's quarterly grant report sitting on her desk. The elegant cursive matched perfectly. "That can't be right," she whispered to herself, fingers flying across her keyboard as she pulled up the Foundation's website. Her eyes widened as Sarah Bennett's professional photograph appeared on the screen, the same woman who had stood so quietly in Judge Matthews' courtroom just hours ago. Jessica pushed her glasses up her nose and began digging deeper. The Foundation's public records showed staggering numbers: $150 million in judicial system grants over 5 years. Their latest project had funded the very computer system she was using to conduct her search. Her phone buzzed with a text from her colleague in accounting. "Did you process Judge Matthews' tech requisition yet?" Jessica glanced at the form waiting in her inbox, a request for new courtroom displays. The funding source listed: the City Betterment Foundation. Sarah Bennett, CEO. "You're not going to believe this," she texted back, her fingers trembling slightly with the weight of her discovery. Moving methodically, Jessica began assembling a folder. She printed the morning's case file, then added the Foundation's grant records. A recent newspaper article caught her eye. Sarah Bennett receiving an award from the State Bar Association for her contributions to justice reform. The photo showed her shaking hands with the Chief Justice. The pieces kept falling into place. The meditation room where judges took their breaks. Funded by Bennett. The new elevator system. Bennett Foundation grant. Even the coffee machine in the break room had been part of a workplace improvement initiative she had championed. Jessica's desk phone rang, startling her. Administrative office. Jessica Chen speaking. "Jessica, it's Mark from security. That lady from traffic court this morning. Did she drive a dark blue Mercedes?" "Yes." "Why?" "She's back. Just parked in the donor space for a meeting with the chief judge." Jessica thanked him and hung up, her heart racing. She had to tell Judge Matthews before that meeting. Not out of malice, but because she believed in fairness, the very principle Sarah Bennett had been funding all these years. With careful precision, she organized her findings into a crisp white envelope. Her hand hesitated over a sticky note, wondering how to phrase this diplomatically. Finally, she wrote, "Your Honor, regarding case #2374 this morning. Some pertinent information for your review." As she walked toward Judge Matthews' chambers, her sensible shoes silent on the marble floors, Jessica thought about the elegant woman who had stood so gracefully in traffic court. She hadn't mentioned her position, hadn't pulled rank, hadn't even hinted at her influence. That spoke volumes about her character. The envelope felt heavy in Jessica's hands as she approached the judge's door. She knew that once he opened it, things would change. Patterns always revealed truth if you knew how to read them. She slipped the envelope under his door and returned to her desk, hands folded in her lap as she waited for the inevitable summons. In the quiet of her office, the wall clock ticked steadily, counting down the moments until her discovery would ripple through the courthouse halls. Judge Matthews discovered the white envelope as he returned from lunch, its corner peeking out beneath his chamber door like a surrender flag. He picked it up, noting the careful handwriting of his trusted administrator, Jessica Chen. Something about her note, "Pertinent information for your review," made him pause before opening it. Inside, he found a stack of meticulously organized papers. His eyes fell first on the morning's case file, then moved to a glossy magazine cover. There she was, Sarah Bennett, seated in a power pose behind an impressive desk, the city skyline visible through windows behind her. The headline read, "The Quiet Revolutionary: How Sarah Bennett's Billions Are Reshaping Justice." "Good Lord," he muttered, sinking into his leather chair. His coffee sat forgotten on his desk as he began reading the article, each paragraph hitting him like a gentle rebuke. Donated over $300 million to judicial reform. Pioneered innovative court modernization programs. Personally funds legal aid for underprivileged communities. His hands trembled slightly as he set down the magazine and picked up Jessica's detailed summary. The Foundation's records showed that Sarah Bennett had funded everything from the courthouse's recent renovation to the very gavel he'd used to fine her that morning. Judge Matthews stood abruptly, walking to his window. The afternoon sun warmed his face as he gazed down at the courthouse plaza. A newly installed fountain burbled there, another Bennett Foundation project, he now realized. He remembered opposing that installation, calling it a waste of resources. Now he wondered what else he had dismissed without proper consideration. His reflection in the window caught his eye. Gray hair, stern expression, the familiar judicial robe. For the first time in years, he truly looked at himself, seeing what others might see, not just authority, but perhaps rigid thinking, quick judgment, unconscious bias. He returned to his desk and pressed the intercom. "Jessica, do we have records of my case dispositions for the past year?" "Yes, Your Honor. Would you like them broken down by category?" "By demographics, if possible." The words felt thick in his throat. 15 minutes later, studying the statistics, Judge Matthews felt the weight settle in his stomach. The numbers told a story he hadn't wanted to see. Sarah Bennett's case wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the first time his pattern had intersected with someone powerful enough to make him notice. His phone buzzed. A calendar notification reminded him of tomorrow's judicial training session, funded by the Bennett Foundation. He planned to send a junior judge in his place, as he usually did. Now, he picked up his phone and confirmed his personal attendance. On his desk, Sarah's case file lay open, her driver's license photo looking up at him. She could have mentioned her position, could have pulled rank, or made a scene. Instead, she had stood there with dignity, accepting his dismissive treatment while holding proof of her evidence in that unopened folder. Judge Matthews reached for his phone again, then stopped. What could he say? "I'm sorry I didn't listen" seemed inadequate. "I didn't know who you were" would be worse, suggesting he only regretted his behavior because of her status. The afternoon light shifted, casting shadows across his desk. In their dancing patterns, he saw something he had missed that morning. His own reflection in the eyes of justice. It wasn't a comfortable sight, but as he sat there among the scattered papers revealing Sarah Bennett's true identity, he knew it was one he needed to face. Sarah sat in her home office, the city lights twinkling beyond her windows like earthbound stars. Her laptop displayed the draft of her new initiative, Project Mirror, reflecting on justice. The irony of the morning's events wasn't lost on her as she refined the proposal's details. Her phone buzzed with a message from Michael, her assistant. "Judge Matthews has registered for tomorrow's training session. First time in 5 years." Sarah allowed herself a small smile but continued typing. The judge's attendance wasn't her end goal. It was merely the first ripple in a larger wave of change she intended to create. "Send the special invitations," she typed back to Michael. Within minutes, 50 personalized envelopes would be dispatched to carefully selected judges across the city, including one Robert Matthews. The invitation itself was a masterpiece of subtle messaging. Cream-colored paper, embossed with the foundation's logo in silver, carried words that had taken her team weeks to perfect. "You are personally invited to join Ms. Sarah Bennett for an evening of transformation in justice reform." Her housekeeper appeared with fresh mint tea. "The news is talking about you again, Ms. Bennett," she said, placing the delicate cup on a coaster. "They're calling you the silent guardian of justice." Sarah thanked her and turned to the wall of windows, remembering her mother's words from years ago. "Change doesn't need a trumpet, it needs persistence." Her mother had cleaned courthouses for 30 years, witnessing daily injustices with quiet dignity. Now, her daughter was transforming those same halls. Her computer chimed with an email from the Chief Justice. "Sarah, bold move with Project Mirror. The old guard won't like it." The old guard didn't like indoor plumbing either. She typed back, "But times change." She opened her presentation slides for the upcoming dinner. Each one was crafted to challenge assumptions without triggering defensiveness. She had learned long ago that shame didn't create change. Understanding did. The first slide showed a simple image, a mirror in an ornate frame. Below it, a question. What do we reflect in our decisions? Her phone buzzed again. Judge Matthews had not only registered for the training, but requested a copy of all previous sessions he'd missed. Sarah added this information to her growing database of responses. Each action, each reaction, helped her refine her approach. Standing, she walked to a small table where a framed photo stood, her mother in her cleaning uniform, standing proudly in front of the courthouse. Next to it sat the parking ticket from that morning, her reminder that no position of power was too high to lose perspective. A notification popped up on her laptop. Judge Matthews had just approved 3 cases similar to hers, accepting evidence of malfunctioning meters. His pattern was already shifting. Sarah turned back to her presentation, adding a new slide. Growth begins with recognition. She thought of the judge's face that morning, so certain in his dismissal. Soon, he would sit in her audience, unaware that his own actions had helped shape the very program he would hear about. Her tea had cooled, But Sarah barely noticed as she continued working. The city lights seemed brighter now, each one representing a life touched by the justice system. Tomorrow, judges would receive their invitations. Next week, they would gather in her foundation's hall. And in that perfectly choreographed moment, she would launch the most ambitious judicial reform program the city had ever seen. Not bad, she thought, for a woman who'd been dismissed in traffic court. The grand ballroom of the Renaissance Hotel sparkled with understated elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over round tables draped in ivory linens, each setting perfect down to the last polished fork. Judge Matthews adjusted his bow tie as he found his assigned seat, front and center. He noticed the carefully curated seating arrangement, each table mixed with judges, community leaders, and legal advocates. His own table card, embossed in gold, placed him beside the Chief Justice and across from the Dean of the State Law School. "Quite different from traffic court, isn't it?" a familiar voice asked. Judge Matthews turned to find Jessica Chen, his court administrator, elegantly dressed in a burgundy evening gown. She'd been invited as a recognized innovator in court efficiency. "Jessica, I didn't expect." "Ms. Bennett believes in recognizing excellence at every level," she said with a knowing smile, before moving to her own table. The lights dimmed slightly, and conversations hushed as Sarah Bennett approached the podium. She wore a stunning royal blue dress that somehow managed to convey both authority and approachability. Judge Matthews felt his chest tighten as he recognized her fully, not as the woman from his courtroom, but as someone who had seen his worst and chosen to make it a catalyst for his best. "Good evening," Sarah began, her voice carrying the same measured tone she'd used in his courtroom. "Tonight isn't about me, or my foundation, or even our substantial investments in justice reform. Tonight is about reflection." The large screens behind her illuminated with a single image, a mirror. Every day, in courtrooms across our city, moments of judgment occur. Some last only minutes, yet their impact can echo for years. Her eyes swept the room, pausing briefly, so briefly only he noticed, on Judge Matthews. "Last week, I experienced such a moment personally." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "I stood before a judge with evidence in hand, yet found myself dismissed without consideration. That judge is here tonight." Judge Matthews felt every eye in the room trying not to turn toward him. His face flushed, but he kept his gaze steady on Sarah. "And I am profoundly grateful for that experience," she continued, surprising everyone. "Because in that moment, I saw not a failure of justice, but an opportunity for transformation." She clicked to the next slide, showing statistics of changed case outcomes over the past week. His cases, he realized, though his name wasn't shown. When we recognize our capacity for growth, something extraordinary happens. In just 1 week, one judge's pattern of decision-making shifted dramatically after a single moment of realization. Imagine what we could achieve if we all embraced such moments of truth. As she continued outlining her vision for judicial reform, Judge Matthews watched her with new understanding. She hadn't arranged this evening to shame him, but to show him, and everyone, a path forward. The dinner progressed with meaningful discussions at every table. When dessert arrived, Judge Matthews found a small envelope beside his plate. Inside, in Sarah's elegant handwriting, was a simple note: "Growth begins with recognition. Thank you for taking the first step." He looked up to find her watching him from across the room. She raised her water glass slightly, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement. He returned the gesture, understanding that this evening wasn't an end, but a beginning. The hotel's rooftop garden provided a peaceful retreat from the evening's events. Fairy lights twinkled among the potted trees, and the city skyline created a perfect backdrop for reflection. Sarah stood at the glass railing, her blue dress catching the evening breeze, when she heard footsteps behind her. "Ms. Bennett," Judge Matthews said softly, "I believe we have a conversation long overdue." She turned, noting how different he looked without his judicial robes, more human, somehow. "Please, call me Sarah. Would you like to sit?" She gestured to a quiet corner where comfortable chairs surrounded a small fire pit. As they settled into their seats, a waiter appeared with 2 cups of mint tea, Sarah's preferred evening drink. She had arranged this moment, down to the last detail, but now allowed silence to fill the space between them. "I've spent the past week reviewing my cases," Judge Matthews finally said, his fingers tracing the rim of his teacup. "Not just recent ones, all of them. The patterns I found," he paused, searching for words, "can be uncomfortable to acknowledge." Sarah completed his thought. "But recognition is the first step toward change. Why didn't you tell me who you were that day in court?" Sarah smiled gently. "Would it have been better if I had? If justice depends on knowing someone's status or influence, then it isn't really justice at all." The fire pit crackled softly, sending warm light across their faces. A shooting star streaked across the sky behind them, as if underlining the moment's significance. "Your mother was a courthouse custodian," Judge Matthews said, surprising her. "I read about her in your foundation's history. 30 years of service. You did your homework," Sarah noted, pleased by his thoroughness. "She must have seen so much during those years. The good and the bad of our justice system." Sarah's expression softened with memory. She used to say she could tell a judge's character by how their courtroom looked at the end of the day. Some treated the space like a temple of justice. Others, she let the thought trail off. "Like a kingdom," he finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I was one of the others, wasn't I?" "You were. But the key word there is were." She leaned forward slightly. "Do you know what impressed me most this past week? Not that you attended the training or changed your ruling pattern. It was that you asked Jessica for those demographic statistics. You wanted to see the truth for yourself." The city lights below them seemed to dance as clouds passed overhead. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine from the garden's planters. "I've been sitting on the bench so long," Judge Matthews reflected. "I forgot what it means to stand before it." Sarah nodded, hearing the genuine realization in his voice. Experience can be wisdom's greatest ally or its worst enemy. It depends on whether we let it open our eyes or close our minds. "Where do we go from here?" he asked. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small leather notebook. "I have some ideas, but first, I'd like to hear yours. Real change happens when we bridge perspectives, not when we build walls between them." As they began to talk, really talk, about the future of justice in their city, the garden's fairy lights seemed to shine a bit brighter. Below them, the courthouse stood illuminated against the night sky, a silent witness to the beginning of its own transformation. 1 year later, the courthouse buzzed with unusual activity. Television crews set up their equipment while photographers positioned themselves for the best angles. The occasion: the launch of the Bennett Matthews Judicial Excellence Program, a groundbreaking initiative that had already caught national attention. Sarah stood at the podium, her cream-colored suit a perfect contrast to the rich wooden panels behind her. Judge Matthews sat among the distinguished guests, no longer in judicial robes, but in a well-tailored suit that reflected his new role as the program's co-director. "When I walked into traffic court 1 year ago," Sarah began, drawing smiles from those who knew the story, "I didn't expect to find a partner in reform. But life's greatest opportunities often arrive disguised as challenges." The audience included faces both familiar and new. Jessica Chen, recently promoted to Chief Court Administrator, sat in the front row. Behind her, judges from across the state filled the seats, each wearing a small silver pin, a mirror-like disc that had become the symbol of their movement. "In 1 year," Sarah continued, "we've seen remarkable changes. Over 200 judges have completed our intensive reflection program. Case review times have increased by 40%, while appeal rates have dropped by 30%. But numbers tell only part of the story." She gestured to a wall where photographs showed judges volunteering in their communities, reading to children, serving at food banks, attending neighborhood meetings. Judge Matthews appeared in many of these images, his formerly stern expression replaced by genuine engagement. "The real transformation," Sarah said, happens in moments no camera can capture. It happens when a judge takes an extra minute to listen, when assumptions are questioned before decisions are made, when justice is tempered with understanding. Judge Matthews approached the podium at Sarah's gesture. The changes in him were subtle but profound. The way he carried himself, the warmth in his eyes, the genuine smile as he faced the audience. A year ago, he began, I thought I knew everything about justice. Ms. Bennett, Sarah, showed me that true justice begins with humility. He paused, meeting her eyes briefly. Our new program pairs senior judges with community members from all walks of life. We learn from each other, challenge our perspectives, and grow together. In the audience, a young woman dabbed at her eyes. She had been one of the first to benefit from their reformed approach. A single mother whose traffic violation had led to a payment plan rather than a punitive fine, thanks to the new guidelines Judge Matthews had helped implement. Sarah returned to the podium, placing a hand on its polished surface, the same podium where, 1 year ago, she had sparked a revolution in judicial thinking. Today, we're not just launching a program, she declared. We're celebrating a new understanding of justice, one that recognizes that behind every case number is a human story, behind every decision is an opportunity for growth, and within every challenge lies the seed of transformation. The applause that followed wasn't just polite appreciation. It was the sound of genuine hope. As camera flashes captured the moment Sarah and Judge Matthews shook hands, their shared smile spoke of something more than professional partnership. It reflected the kind of change that happens when wisdom meets humility, when power meets purpose, and when justice meets understanding. Outside, the fountain in the courthouse plaza danced in the sunlight, its waters catching the morning rays just as they had 1 year ago. But now, its melody seemed to sing a different tune, one of promise, of progress, and of the remarkable things that can happen when people dare to look in the mirror and choose to grow from what they see.